So I just want to make a suggestion if you're looking at the political candidates in New Zealand currently, and that is that you line up all of their promises about world-class this and that, and new rail systems and lots of spending everywhere else, when we've just had a public budget announcement for health that leaves us $1 billion short of what the unions have requested, and probably $3 to $30 billion short of what the public need to actually have adequate health care. The point being is the money is not in the system, and the reason for that is something that every New Zealander needs to start caring about. That is, the banks take $2 out of every $5 generated out of this country every year, minimum. That's just what is, really obviously declared on the P&L and transferred offshore. 2 out of every 5. So let's kind of round it up. It's probably about half, if not more, of the money generated in this country is transferred off to foreign ownership. Nearly 50% of our companies are owned by foreigners now, nearly 50%. That figure went up by 10% last year alone. If you keep going at that trajectory, you're going to end up with 90% foreign ownership within another 4 years. It's absolutely terrifying that this is legally allowed under national/international party, national, the International Party, and Labour, which, I don't know, I read their policies and I feel like it's eating stale cardboard. There's nothing really innovative there, but the promise of a new rail system in Auckland, fantastic. The fact is, who's going to pay for it? 50% of our businesses are foreign owned. Almost half of our money that is profit is taken out of the country by the banks, who should not have our private bank licenses anymore. They should not have the power to create our money, to create debt asset that we then spend the rest of our life paying back, whether it's a loan for a house and a mortgage or a business loan, generating assets that didn't exist prior to them lending them to us based on an old contract, a private banking license, which can be cancelled. The fact is that almost around 30%, maybe more, of our land is also foreign owned now, and the laws around, especially agriculture, where you can, foreigners can now produce our product in addition to owning our farms, are just so dangerous. So it comes back to the question, when all of these parties make these beautiful promises, like the perfect new rail system, I mean, geez, why don't you bring in, why don't we lead the world in hovercraft use, because that's cooler. But the fact is that it's all about money. We can do incredible things. I could take all of the policies off all of the other websites so easily, which obviously I didn't, because if you read my policies, they suggest dramatic change, but very, very logical change. Why are we letting foreign owners create our debt assets through private banking licenses that can be cancelled? I was totally heartened to read Winston Peters' policy that he is proposing to consolidate the energy companies back to one company and nationalise the asset of producing energy for the benefit of the public budget and New Zealanders, which is amazing. But as I said to him, why not nationalise the telecommunications companies as well? Why not get our phone bills down? Why not nationalise the banks? Why create a campaign where you're saying, okay, we want to take on the banks and study them and see what they're doing? It's very clear what they're doing. They're taking half the money out of the system each year. They control our currencies and cash. They control half of the money that we generate, and that money could be going back, instead of to foreign owners, it could be going back into the public health system, back into creating world-class railroads. I mean, unless we are going to take back our asset creation or our money creating tools and nationalise them, nationalise that power, which definitely belongs to the people, then we only have one other choice to generate the money that doesn't currently exist to do fancy new rail systems, and that's to take on more foreign debt. So we're already probably servicing about $4 billion in interest a year. That's probably nearing anywhere between 20 and 30 million a day that our interest bill goes up, that we pay in interest each year to foreign debt holders. And we're at 87 billion. I read somewhere, and I need to verify this, but I read somewhere the other day we were at 8 billion in debt until John Key took office and sent us up to 87 billion. But we were never in debt in the first place until Muldoon came along after working for, was it the IMF or the World Bank, and then putting us billions of dollars in debt to begin with for the benefit of his old bosses. The leadership of this country has been systematically corrupt. Helen Clark brought in the TTPA. That trade agreement enables foreign countries and foreign governments and foreign companies to sue us for our public budget. You know, there's a case in El Salvador that I touched on for a while where a New Zealand director was involved in Oceania Gold, and he was one of 6 directors who sued the government of El Salvador because they had declined his license to gold mine in the river that provided 3/4 of their population's drinking water. So gold mining is arsenic, mercury, cyanide directly in the water. It's repetitive explosives. You're definitely not getting drinking water out of that river if they were given the go-ahead. So the government declined their license, and so they sued them for $300 million. That's half of their annual public budget, you know, to spend on elderly and children and helping people in the community. Half of their annual public budget for private gain because they said opportunity cost. They didn't have the opportunity to drill in the people's water, so they were suing the government for the cost or the loss that they would incur through not being able to do that. That is what the TTPA allows, and that will be used. So that was Labour who brought that in. National are the International Party. I got that off Winston Peters' speech in Parliament, but it's brilliant, who are selling off all of our wealth, our land, our assets, our company, you name it, production rights, everything, to international groups, consortiums, governments, individuals, whatever. But their last priority seems to be the New Zealand people. You can tell that by the health budget. If nothing else, $1 billion under what the unions wanted, and as I've mentioned before, 3 to 30 billion probably under what a world-class healthcare would afford. But of course, we won't go into debt to ensure that people have adequate healthcare. Look, as I said, when I read Winston Peters' policies, which, you know, he's suggesting amongst the best options where pensioners should have at least 3 free healthcare doctor's visits per year. Are you kidding me? We can't give our elderly the dignity of adequate healthcare whenever they need. So the elderly who are currently at home on pensions that can't afford them to pay for their heating bill in the winter, they sit in the cold, that can't afford to pay for their mobile bill top-ups, they can't afford to stay connected with their family or have a conversation beyond 5 minutes. They literally cannot afford to pay. So then they're confronted with the fact that they also can't afford to pay for their doctor's bills if it's beyond 3 visits a year. That's insane. While we let bankers take half of our money offshore each year, while we're selling off half of our assets. I've got little dogs rumbling at my feet. They're getting into the political debate and fight, I think. Oh my God. Okay, look, my point is that all of these political campaigns are disingenuous because they don't address the major point. And I was absolutely overjoyed to see that Winston did have not a policy on banking, but he is the only one who is saying we need to take on the banks. We need to work out why we are allowing half of our money to go offshore every single year while we can't afford adequate healthcare. That is admirable, but actually what we need to do is cancel those private banking licenses. Immediately recover the power of that debt. If you forget, you can't forget about the costs of managing these debts, but do some basic maths. We have $400 billion of private debt currently. Put a 10% interest rate on that per year. That's $40 billion. Our entire income tax is about $35 or $36 billion. So we actually could take back the debt creation assets that we've given under just contracts, banking license contracts to these foreign owners. We could take that back and cancel the income tax, and we would still have more in the public budget. But if we're able to then have a debt asset creation tool where we can actually earn the principal repayments back, which are assets that came from nowhere in the first place, and that money could have come from offshore. I mean, it makes no difference if we just promised someone to be able to spend money in advance of them earning it. When they earned it, they paid us a whole bunch back. We then spend that on the public budget. That is a very, very, very natural equation for any country. But these systems have hijacked that for the benefit of foreign owners. And so when you're listening to all these campaign promises, think, where is the money going to come from? We can all build first-class train rail systems, no problem. We can build hovercrafts all over the country, no problem. But who's going to pay? Because we can't even afford to pay for our healthcare at the moment. And we can't even afford for our pensioners to go to the doctor an unlimited number of times if they need to. So there is a problem in the system. You can read more about my policies at logic.org.nz. Cheers.